Okay, so tonight we are picking up with Joshua. We're finishing Joshua. Okay, now I can't even begin to imagine. Remember where Joshua started in that process of finishing. I can't imagine all of the walking, the difficult situations that they got into, the tough times they had. We walked out into the garage, and it's now summer already, right? We had like 2 days of spring, and but that was their normal life, Desert was it, and they walked them for 40 years. Joshua walked it 40 years. Caleb walked it for 40 years, and I thank Michael for his lesson. I listened to it. It was a great job talking about Caleb, and it's no wonder that for a while, Joshua and Caleb were the number one names chosen for children because of their character that they demonstrated. Okay, I need to get into the slides. We have a number of them tonight. I want to see if this thing's going to go. Yeah. Okay. This was, let's say, the overarching verse that we use to kind of give ourselves the view, if you will, the feeling of being there with Joshua. God said this to him, be strong and courageous. And he's saying that to you and I today. We have some similar situations today in this world. We're not living in this desert here. We could if we wanted to. But we have the same kinds of trouble in our lives that they did, and we saw that as we passed through their lives. Tonight we're going to be looking at chapters 23 and 24 for the most part, and in Joshua 24 and verse 15 is probably, maybe the second most famous phrase quoted in the Bible. I think the first one is God so loved the world. Okay. And but this one is probably one of the more famous ones, because Joshua put it to those that he had walked with. He was the perfect preacher, was he not? And he was meaning to instill in those that were with him. And just think about this: you got 12 tribes of people. Okay, this is not an easy thing to control, communicate, and lead. And he challenged them. He said, and this idea of, and we'll talk about it a little bit when we get to that verse, but and if it is evil in your eyes to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your father served in the region beyond the river, or of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. So he put it out there. He put that challenge there to them. And he basically was telling them, you got to make a choice now. And we'll see them say that they've made a choice. We know that when we get into Judges, there's a cyclical issue that goes on there, where they fail, where they pray to God, where they're saved by a judge, then they come back and repeat that. But I think that he's asking these guys to make a specific personal decision in this case. That's not something we often do, even to this day, whereby we make a decision. We say to ourselves, how many times do we do this? I'm not going to do that again. And yet we find ourselves doing that again. And I think in that way is what I mean, that we're people like they were people like we are. And when we see them and how they act, how they served, how they failed, how where their emotions took them, we have all those same things even today. Joshua was not an abstract leader. He preached for decisions. He wanted the people to make this decision. He was earnest in that. And of course, he says to them, this is what I'm going to do. Now, from the very beginning, Joshua was let's call him the partner for Moses. He helped Moses. He was with Moses when Moses went up to the mountain. He was an amazing person to work through all of the problems that we're going to have. But it was a big deal, wasn't it? I mean, this happening was a big deal. I mean, when we have, and I may have the map in here, where we see the area that they were supposed to take over. Now, they were supposed to move from where they were, become a nation, learn how to worship God, and then take over this land that was given to them, promised to Abraham. They were able to be part of that promise being fulfilled. And what an amazing, I think, an amazing story, an account that we have here. I'm going to go on, or else I'll talk us into the ground here. Okay. Tonight we are going to be focused. I'm going to just do a little talk on the refuge cities, and then talk about or see how their success was conditional, and how it played out, just like our success with God is conditional today, conditional in our obedience, and that's where their problem was too. They had to be obedient, and they were challenged to do that. We're going to talk a little bit then about these cities of refuge. We're not going to be able to go into all of it. It's quite an interesting part of managing, if you will, the people, the tribes, etc., in that day and time. We know that that they were some of these were chosen, and this particular map here shows what they had settled and what they hadn't settled, and that's even still the case tonight when we are finishing Joshua. There's some areas that were not settled, were not finished. They did not toss out the people that were living there, and so they were not really able. They say they were not really able to do that. Okay, this is a map of these cities of refuge, and I tried to open them up a little bit, where you can see there's three shown on here. There's a fourth that's kind of shown, but the top three that are shown here, and you'll see that they seem to be fairly well dispersed, don't they? Whereby you had a place to get to, no matter where you were, because what were you trying to do to get to that city of refuge? What was the purpose? Save your life, right? I mean, you went there and to let's say escape one of the laws that life for life, right? And if you had taken someone's life, but there were some laws around that too. Was it an accident? Was it premeditated? There were some more things, okay, that we would have to look back at to say. But these cities here, they could go to, and the one that had the blood oath, one that was meant to come and take your life for some life you took, could not enter that city. You left that city, and you're basically fair game. All right, and so I just kind of wanted to show how this lays out. That kind of ended a little bit at Shechem. Couldn't see it, so I put Shechem on the lower one. But you have Shechem, Bezer, and Hebron. Once again, looks like it's kind of close, not exactly in every single tribe's location, but I think it was fairly well dispersed to try to give people a chance. Now, the idea was that you would, if you were guilty, you were still going to be guilty. It was only that you got some time to prove whether you were guilty or not. You could go into these cities, this city and the one that was trying to exact the blood oath could not go in. Okay. Something happened in the last part of chapter 22 that I felt was not only interesting, but when we think about Israel and how they lived and their life and their relationship with God, we might think they were never listening. They never had any idea what God really wanted them to do. And if they were listening, they were not going to do it. This is an interesting reading at this last part of Joshua chapter 22, beginning in verse 10. Now, I'm pretty much going to be textual tonight, so you can follow this in your Bibles if you want to. And this is all ESV that I have on the screen. But it was interesting to me that in verse 10 we learn that when the tribes, remember the tribe Reuben, Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh, what had they done? They'd never crossed. They settled lands that were on the east side of Jordan, weren't they? And then the rest of the tribes crossed Jordan and settled land on the west side of Jordan. The eastern tribes went home. They were done. So they went home, but when they went home, on the way, and this is where we don't get to have every single question answered like we want our novels to tell us, okay? Because once they got to the river, what did they do? They built an altar that looked surprisingly like the burnt altar, the bronze altar with the horns that they burnt their sacrifices on. It was oversized, they said. It was bigger than life, if you will. And those that were on the west side took issue with that. Like, are you going to be worshiping on your own? Have you pulled back away from us? Okay, we're going to look at this a little bit. Okay, I think it's interesting, though, that they had actually not made. Some of them hadn't even seen it really. Okay, and so on hearsay, verse 11, chapter 22, 11 says, "Behold." Says the people of Israel heard it said, behold, the people of Reuben and the people of Gad and the half tribe of Manasseh. Have I done that yet? Okay, sorry. And the half tribe of Manasseh have built the altar at the frontier of the land of Canaan, in the region about the Jordan, on the side that belongs to the people of Israel. So it appears that they set it up on the other side of the river, right? It says, and when the people of Israel heard of it, the whole assembly gathered at Shiloh to make war against them. Okay? There had to have been a whole lot more conversation around this, don't you think? A whole lot back and forth, and before they decided, let's go to war, okay? Let's go to war. So based on this story that they had been hearing, the people that were on the west side of the Jordan River decided to come and attack. But fortunately, calmer heads prevailed, okay, because they didn't actually go to war. But this is what the Western tribes' thought process was, which I thought was very interesting, and I think it proves that they were listening. They were paying attention to what God was saying and what had been happening to them, even though sometimes it does not appear that way. But they definitely were this time, because here's what they said to the three tribes on the east side. Have we not had enough of the sin at Peor, from which even yet we have not cleansed ourselves, and for which there came a plague upon the congregation of the Lord? They were remembering Achan. They were remembering what had happened to them. And they say that, that you too must turn away this day from following the Lord. They thought they built the altar so they didn't have to go and worship with Israel at the tent. Okay? It says, and if you too rebel against the Lord today, then tomorrow he will be angry with the whole congregation of Israel. And they were right, weren't they? Achan sinned, but everyone paid a price for that sin. So they bring this charge, if you will, Phinehas does, against the eastern tribes. And it was getting close, right? It was getting close. Are they going to have war? Are they going to have to cross the Jordan and invade? Okay, going on. This, though, is what the eastern tribes' thought process was. So you know what the western thought. Here's what the eastern is now saying to them. Therefore we said, let us now build an altar, not for burnt offering, nor for sacrifice, but to be a witness between us and you, between our generations after us, that we do perform the service of the Lord in his presence with our burnt offerings and sacrifices and peace offerings. So your children will not say to our children into time to come, you have no portion in the Lord. So, the right or wrong, good thoughts, don't know. But the eastern tribes were worried that the western tribes would forget them and would begin to accuse them of not being part of them. Because the dividing line of the Jordan, it was a dividing line that had been set. But Moses had allowed them to take that land. So having the land was okay, but the western side saw this altar and said, wait a minute, what are you doing? Are you separating from us, as a nation? I think I have a picture here. Remember, these are artists drawing these things, okay? We kind of know what the altar looked like, the bronze altar, and so they kind of, copied that and used that. But let's call them the Transjordan tribes, didn't build it on their side of the Jordan, but across the river from where they would live. So they built this altar on the western side. Okay, so I'm going to have a little blow up on this, but on the left-hand side, you can see kind of the lay of the land now, right? I could not find anywhere that indicated where this altar might be, okay? We do know, though, what was in between them and the altar, the Jordan. So the Jordan River has to be there, right? And it appears that it's probably Gad, okay, where this was located. I tried to blow this up a little bit. So I don't know if you can see, but the picture on the right has a distance picture of the altar. And so I kind of blew it up, and the one on the left then shows the altar. Okay? So they kind of built this oversized altar that was a replica, if you will, of the bronze altar where they burnt offerings on. And that's what got the attention of the western tribes, okay, worrying that they were going to do something that was wrong. And I believe what happened, PR, is where they went into the Moabite women. I think I might have leaned that in the wrong direction. It was where they went with the Moabite women, and 24,000 people died from a plague, okay, because of that. They did not want that to happen again. Okay, kind of interesting, isn't it? This last little issue, if you will. I wondered at the beginning what the western tribes thought of the eastern tribes being able to have land on the east side of the Jordan River. Whether or not they had some issues with it, whether or not they were a little irritated with them, I don't know, but they seemed to jump to a big conclusion here before they ever really talked to him. Fortunately, they did. Calmer minds were involved. Okay, let's go on into chapter 23, the things that we're going to find here, Joshua is going to repeatedly try to reinforce with the Israelites what they're going to have to do if they want to be successful as a nation after this, after taking over these lands. And this first 6 verses kind of talk about this. They talk about God and what he had done to them, his deliverance from them. And we're not going to go through all of that again because we did study it before, but in verse 2 of 23, we find Joshua asking all of Israel, calling them all, the elders, the heads, its judges, all the officers, etc., to come together and to meet with him. And life has moved on. What does Joshua say? I'm old. He's now seeing his mortality, and he's wondering. He's looking at these people on spindly legs. Are they going to stand up? Are they going to be true? What's going to happen when I'm gone? Okay. And so he tells them, I'm advanced in age. And then he goes on in verse 3, he begins the process of telling them, repeating to them, recounting all of the things that God had done for them. And he would continue to do, but we'll see, that's conditional. But God has done to all these nations for your sake, for it is the Lord your God who has fought for you. How many times did we see them go into a battle and we see God win the battle? It really was not, some cases they didn't even take a sword, out of the sheath, right? And God had won the battle for them. It was the promised land, promise that he had made to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, being fulfilled now in the time of Joshua. Let me see if anything else I wanted to bring out of this. Verse 6 says, be very strong to keep and do all that is written in the book of the law of Moses. The way I kind of entitle this is, how will they succeed? Well, they'll succeed if they're strong, they keep and do all that is written in the book of the law of Moses, turning aside from it neither to the right hand or to the left. Okay, so follow it right down the letter of the law, right? Is what he was encouraging them to do. And it's another way, basically, of saying, be strong and courageous, right? Because that's what it was going to take for them. So there's still a lot of area that they were individually supposed to go and conquer as a tribe, individual tribes, which they have some success and in some cases limited success in actually doing all of that. One of the keys that he brings up to them becomes, I think, in the end, one of the hardest things for them to do. Don't make friends, don't make peace with those that God considers the enemy. Verse 7 says that you may not mix with these nations remaining among you, or make mention of the names of their gods, or swear by them, or serve them, or bow down to them. But you shall cling to the Lord your God, just as you have done to this day. I think that most of his message, most of Joshua's message, is going to be encouraging. Now, they had memories. These people weren't, they weren't blanks in their brain. Okay, they knew they hadn't done. They were not perfect. They knew that they were not perfect. But Joshua focuses more on them doing the right thing than just continuing to go through the things that they had done that cost lives. Okay, people died because of it. this idea here of those that remain among you, I think, was that if there was anything that maybe God could cringe at, if God has that kind of characteristic, that he would cringe at the fact that they had not removed all of the challenging people that were in the area that he had promised them to have, this land that he had promised them to have. And Israel's, let's call it lethargy, I'll be kind, their lethargy in driving out these last enemies. It may be a little difficult to understand, but God did say he would drive them out little by little. Eventually, I think that we'll find Israel's resolve is the issue, and they aren't really able to do all God had intended for them to do. Kind of continuing in this vein, we see in verse 9 that the Lord has driven out before you great and strong nations, and they had seen that, right? I mean, we're reading about it. They had lived it. Okay? There is a difference. There is a difference there. Now, through faith, there's no difference. Through hope, there's no difference. But when you lived it, and these people were living it, there is a difference. Okay? It's strong. You saw God do these things for you. The last verse here, be very careful, therefore, to love the Lord your God. You know, this was basically, I think he's expecting them. Acknowledge what God has done. Look at all that he has done. Look at all the victories that he has given us. Look at where we are. Look at the land we've taken over. We're living in houses we didn't build. We're eating food we did not plant. Okay? We're eating animals that we did not raise, okay, because of God's promise to them. But there is a condition here. For if you turn back and cling to the remnant of these nations that are remaining among you, and make marriages with them, so that you associate with them and they with you, know for certain that the Lord your God will no longer drive out these nations before you, but they shall be a snare and a trap for you, a whip on your sides, thorns in your eyes, until you perish from off this good ground that the Lord your God has given you. Pretty stern warning here, isn't it? And pretty clear that you have something you have to do. You have some obedience, respect, demonstrating love for God that has to be part of this solution, the success. So God works both ways. Right? We know today that we can fail, right? We can stumble. God's given us a way now to find our way back, to have forgiveness. There were some of them that stumbled and did not get that opportunity then. This is when God dealt directly with them, right? But this is what Joshua tells them, and the part that I have in yellow, that not one word has failed of all the good things that the Lord your God promised concerning you. All have come to pass for you. Not one of them has failed. So in his mind, he has delivered the land to them. He created them as a nation, turned them into a nation, gave them a way to have a relationship with him, and then the land promise that they could move into and live in. And part of the other verses here, just as all the good things that the Lord your God promised concerning you have been fulfilled for you, so the Lord will bring upon you all the evil things until he has destroyed you from off this good land that the Lord your God has given you. It's a conditional, right? They have something they have to do. Joshua may die. But God will not change. If Joshua dies, same expectation is of Israel. And they will have to live up to that. And it's when we go into the first chapter in Judges, we'll see that they had some success, some not so much. Okay. Part of the challenge is idols, and idols have been a problem for them even when they were in Egypt. Okay? And idol worshiping will be an issue for them. So if you transgress the covenant of the Lord your God, which he commanded you, and go and serve other gods and bow down before them, then the anger of the Lord will be kindled against you. Pretty clear, plain speaking by Joshua. And you shall perish quickly from off the good land that he has given you. I think that Joshua has spent quite a bit of his last message, hasn't he? Explaining to them what's going to happen, the good, the bad, their part in that, and how that could happen, how they could be successful. And this leads up really to, I think, this next idea in chapter 24, where it says God's great works are remembered. The covenant gets renewed during this chapter. Okay, it looks like I've got the wrong ones in the top there. But we're now in chapter 24, okay, if you're following along in your Bible. The covenant that had been made with Israel gets renewed, maybe the wrong word, but for that, it was still there before. But they are rejuvenated in terms of their relationship to God. Joshua spends some time reminding them, if you will, of all the good that God had done for them, kind of encouraging them, getting them to redirect their minds back to all the good. And then they are challenged. Joshua lays it out there. Choose God or choose evil. The result of that is going to be your destiny, whatever. And then we see Joshua and Eleazar dying at the end of the chapter. So Joshua gathers all the tribes together at Shechem. And I don't have we saw Shechem up before when I had the maps up. But Shechem has a long history with Israel. It has a history that began all the way back with Abraham. Right? When Abraham first went into the Promised Land, the first place he camped was at Shechem. Okay. And so Joshua pulls them over to Shechem, and he's going to talk to them. Okay, and he's going to talk to them about where they're headed and what they can do, if you will. And I didn't really do this. I changed a little bit here. So if you can open your Bibles, we're going to go through to each one of these sections here. The first two verses are where we're at in the reading. So God was faithful. So who are the patriarchs? When you hear the word patriarch, what comes to your mind? Pardon? Okay, the fathers. You have going all the way back to Terah. You have Abraham. You have Isaac. You have Jacob. You have Esau. Okay, the fathers, if you will, the patriarchs of Israel. And we don't often think of Joshua as a prophet. We think of him. He's kind of a complex image in our mind. He's standing there with a sword, ready to go to battle. He's a judge, with a black robe on, listening. He's encouraging. He's a preacher. Okay, he is the leader. Okay, and all those things, I think, are what makes him a leader. But at this time, he goes through here and recants all of what had been done for them. And in that way, to be a prophet does not always mean foretell the future, does it? It means to teach, doesn't it? To teach. And that's what he is doing here, is to bringing up what had happened, the good that had been done. In verse 5, we find God, he says this in a way that is first person, okay, like it's God speaking here, okay? And verse 5 says, I sent Moses and Aaron, I plagued Egypt, okay? The Egyptians pursued your fathers with chariots and horsemen into the Red Sea, and then what happened? It collapsed on them, right? And he saved them. Joshua goes through and revisits each one of these things that God had done to save them. He reminds them of God's faithfulness, if you will, in the wilderness. We know that he helped protect them, that those that had rose up to do battle with them, God was there to take care of them. He would not listen. I would not listen to Balaam. Remember Balaam doing his cursing? Okay. He said, instead, what's he say? God says, instead, I made him bless me. Okay. Bless you in verse 10. So I delivered you out of his hand. Verses 11 to 13, he talks about all of what God had done while in Canaan. I'm not going to read all of this, but some of the names: Amorites, the Perizzites, the Canaanites, Hittites, etc., Girgashites. Okay, so these are all the people that had previously lived in that land. And he drove them out. He says, I delivered them into your hand. I sent the hornet before you, which drove them out from before you. Also the two kings of the Amorites, but not with your sword or with your bow. Okay? God was the one that was doing the fighting and took care of those kings. Okay. It's kind of interesting. Some try to give you a feel for, well, what did it mean by the hornets? Okay. There was a particular hornet, an actual bug, okay, there, that was mean-spirited is how I would put it, okay? And very active and didn't give up, all right? And the difference between, the difference between a hornet and a honeybee? The hornet can keep stinging you. The honeybee dies after it stings, okay? And so I'm sure that and other things like that is what God used. God used nature, storms, hail, things like that to accomplish what he wanted to get done. The challenge here in verse 14 says, fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity and in faithfulness. Put away the gods that your fathers served beyond the river and in Egypt. And this is our often quoted verse. If it is evil in your eyes to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your fathers served in the region beyond the river or the gods of the Amorites in the land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Done? Is that number 2? All right. I'm going to probably take, given I'll be teaching next week, and we'll be going into Judges, I'll probably borrow a little bit of that to kind of smooth this together so you can't see a break here. All right. Thank you, everyone.